Hi everyone, thank you for joining us for this discussion. This is a response discussion related to the Garifuna. The Garifuna have a very mysterious and conflicting history. There's one narrative that indicates that they came to the Americas on slave ships. There's another narrative that indicates that they came before the slave ships. Regardless of which narrative you espouse, there is the understanding that their heritage is rooted in West Africa. One thing to keep in mind, however, is that whether you're talking about from the north to the south, when you're talking about West Africa, it essentially, historically, was formed as a long colony of similar people. And these similar people have a history of coming from the east to the west. And so we're going to be looking at the name, origin, and identity of the Garifuna that supports a tie not only to the east, as in Africa, but also to Asia and what is known as the Middle East. And it also supports the idea of a mysterious crypto identity for the Garifuna. There's a standard narrative about the Garifuna name, and the name origin is supposed to be tied to cassava. And so the belief is that, or the narrative is that, they were named this because it literally means cassava eating people. However, it's very difficult to connect the word Garifuna with cassava in terms of etymology. You also see another transliteration, which is Karif-Una. And in nativelanguages.org, you see this offering that the Garifuna are also known as the Black Carib. They are also understood as Moreno. They are ultimately understood as a Creole group of people, which is a mixed race group of people. Now, the original narrative is that the Caribbean people were helping the Garifuna by attacking these Spanish slave ships, and this is back in the 1600s, and then they adopted the enslaved people who were in conflict with the Spanish. And it's also noted that as this creolized group of people, that they have their own unique culture. You also see here again this offering of Garifuna being the cassava people or cassava eating people. What also stands out is this origin that's supposed to be Taino. And when you look at the Taino origin, you see a betacism situation going on. And so there's a question about, did the Taino actually engage in betacism? Or is this coming from the East where you typically see betacism situations? And so you also see the French using the betacism. And remember, betacism is where that B and the V are interchanged. There were multiple attempts to see if cassava was related to Garifuna in any language. And as you can see, you do not see this transliteration of cassava into Garifuna. What you see basically is a preservation of cassava. And so you see this in the Arabic. You also see this preservation in the Latin. But what I want to call your attention to is the Yoruba offering. And so when you look very closely at the Yoruba offering, you see something very specific. You see the GB, and then after the GB, you see Aguda, or what some people have pronounced as Ajuda. But if you recall our discussion about the Aguda, the Ajuda, you know that there's another narrative going on with respect to that name that creates quite a bit of confusion when you just look at it in its raw form, and there is no other offering with respect to clarifying what's going on with that. And the fact that the word contains Mandi in it in terms of the mandioca, that is also noteworthy with respect to this particular people group and a potential history for this particular people group. There was also an attempt to do a transliteration for Garifuna, but what kept coming up was Garifuna. And so you see that it's detected as an English word, and so that was interesting to note. But you see in the Greek, you're still getting Garifuna. There's nothing coming up that is substantially similar to cassava. And you see this continuation of the word Garifuna, whether you were looking at the Spanish or the French. In addition to the letter swapping that we've already observed with respect to the Garifuna, you will also notice that in addition to the betacism situation, you have some other letters that can be swapped out with each other. So you have that when you're talking about the F and the PH. You also have that, and many people might not know this, with the G sound and the C or the K sound. And sometimes you will see those letters interchanged, and it's basically indicating the same word, but the spelling looks different. And so when you start to deconstruct Garifuna, which has been offered as a variation of Karif-Una, you will come to caliphate and khalifa. There are a few mental gymnastics involved in getting from Garifuna to caliphate, and we're going to look at how this might have occurred. One thing to keep in mind is that with many Asian languages, when you hear the pronunciation of certain words, you hear swapping. And so there's one swapping situation that goes on with L and R. And so in some instances, an individual who is communicating about Garifuna might swap out the letters L and R. And if you recall in the earlier commentary that we were looking at about the history of the Garifuna, you noted that there were some words in the middle that were transliterations of Garifuna. And so what you would have noted would have been Karif with one F, Karif with two Fs, and then you have Karif going from the C-A-R-I-F to K-A-R-I-F. And when you have these words indicating Garifuna, you have Garifuna translating to Caliph, Khalifa. And so we're going to look at how some languages have treated this word Karifuna and how it translates directly to Khalifa or Caliphate. And this is going to give an indication about the historical backdrop of this people group that appears to be shrouded in mystery. And it's also going to shed some light on the cultural preservation festival that involves that black face and white mask, and also the head covering and the face covering. Now, as you recall, we just discussed that the C, the K sound is interchangeable with the G. And that's why in terms of the name, you have the people historically being known interchangeably as Karifuna and Garifuna. And when you look at the root of, or the origin of, the detection of Karifuna, you see that it is Japanese detected. Now remember that when we're talking about the people group, that there is an indication that the people group is rooted in West Africa, and that whether you're talking about North or South, and that the people group, that long colony of people, that people group is from the East, as in Asia, as in the Middle East. Okay, so come back to this Karifuna with this Japanese detection. When you look at the translation of Karifuna, what it says in the Latin is Caliph with the C. And you see here more specifically the C-A-L-I-F-E. You also saw the C-A-L-I-P-H. And very important here, you see in the Arabic that this is translating as Khalifa. You also see in the German that Karifuna is Caliph. And you can confirm this by doing a back translation between the Arabic and the English, and it's still going to come out as Caliph. And as with the word Karif-Una translating into the Arabic as Khalifa, you also see when you simply use caliphate in the English that it translates in the Arabic as a Khalifa.